Hello, hello. Our guest of honor is here already. Jesse is here. Thank you, Jesse, for taking the time. We were just saying before we hopped on, I was like, I miss you. We used to hang. So I'm very happy to bring Jesse to you all. And I was telling Jesse that we are hanging out in great company today with folks who are either about to enter health and wellness industry or are very much in the health and wellness industry, whether you are a personal trainer, a strength coach, nutrition coach. Actually, let us know, like just in the chat, pop it in. Like, what do you do? Just to give Jesse a little rundown, a little vote of what you do, who you are, what you offer, and we will jump in. Okay, well, I guess let's just start with kind of like the basics. Jesse, this is the question I ask. I say, if you're at a neighborhood barbecue and somebody asks you, what do you do for a living? How do you answer that question?
I say I'm a body image coach. I feel like at this point that is pretty understandable. If I'm talking to people who are really not going to get that, I'll say I'm a life coach and I work with people on their body image. And yeah, it sort of depends, but body image coach.
Oh, okay. Well, if those of you are who are live on the call with us today, if you have specific questions, client scenarios, start pulling them out of your brain and start popping them into the chat. Meanwhile, I think, Jesse, I'm just going to kick this off with this all-encompassing question that I think we've all struggled with, and it kind of goes like this. I work with people in some capacity. It might be as a personal trainer, it might be as a nutrition coach. And what I get back is somebody who's extremely negative about their
Yeah.
body, right? Like it's like we could be doing anything. I could be showing them how to do squats, and they catch a glimpse of themselves in the mirror, and you get this like, oh, I just hate how my body looks.
Yeah.
Let's start there because I think that's pretty universally applicable.
Yeah.
It might have been you. You might have caught a glimpse of yourself in the mirror and had that thought too. So, how would you what would you say even as a
Right.
coach at that moment? You're coming to us also from like health and wellness.
I was gonna say, I mean, I literally, that's why I do what I do now, is because I was a personal trainer and those moments did always happen. And I feel like the sort of dominant, like cultural narrative around body image is like when you look good enough, you'll finally feel confident. But I was working with, like models and actors and just the most conventionally attractive people in the world in some ways. And it was always the same. So I kind of realized, well, if if it's not about looking good enough, then what the hell is it about? And that really led me down the path of everything that I do now. So I think ultimately, like, it's not something you can just tackle in a moment like that. That's why I wanted to sort of go into the deeper space of it. But I will say that I think the way you set up your client relationships makes a huge difference. Like how you because people are going to come in and be like, well, I have to get rid of this because it's gross. And if at that point, the first time that someone says something like that, you're like totally understood, like that's a really common struggle, you've basically just agreed, yes, that's gross, yes, you have to get rid of it. So now when they're looking in the mirror and they're like, having some kind of response, it would actually be weird to backtrack and be like, oh, you're fine. Like you've already entered a space of agreement about what their goals are and should be, what their body means. So I personally feel like it's it's something that kind of has to start in the beginning of a relationship or get worked in as like a new layer of I'm doing a new thing and here's what it's going to be in order to be able to tackle those moments with any kind of productivity. They have to understand that body image stuff is about something deeper. It's not like the myth we've been given that it's just very simply it's gross, so you have to fix it or feel bad about it. Um, and body image issues are always about something deeper. They're always pointing us in the direction of something around like identity and self-worth, or basically the meaning that we assign to various appearances or functionalities of our bodies. And most people just have no idea. So it's a huge thing to tackle in the moment. You can't be like, oh, you're fine, because obviously they don't feel fine. But it's also kind of, it would be pretty intense to be like, all right, stop doing squats. Let's talk about what your body means to you. You know, it's a big topic. So not to say you couldn't, but like, I think going in and having some of those things set up front just makes it so much easier in the moment to be like, huh, why do you think that's feeling so intense right now? Or you know, like starting to be able to ask questions that guide them into the deeper stuff that might be going on. It's hard if you haven't established the fact that something deeper is going on, you know, because that's not what most people don't think. Oh, my body image issues are probably about something deeper. I probably have like deeply you know, like there's probably some metaphorical emotional trauma related to this, or I'm sort of giving my body like the power to earn me my worthiness in the world, or make up for the fact that I have some horrible character flaw that I'm ashamed of. Like, people don't think of it that way. They just think it's ugly. So I hate it.
And this almost reminds me, like, this is similar to how we would tackle any difficult conversation with like anyone in our life, like where what you're describing, like there is almost like two pieces here. On one hand, we do want to know how to respond in the
Yeah.
moment, right? Like in a way that is like, my thighs are disgusting. I think the most extreme, and this might be triggering for some folks, so kind of go like this. But probably the most extreme comment I've received from a client that kind of made me go like, and Jesse, I highly doubt this will be very surprising. Yeah, it's like I heard them all. Trust me. She said, "I hate my thighs so much. I just wish I could take a blade and just like slice the fat off." Right? And I was just like,
Oh
"Yeah,
yeah.
right." Like imagine. So like responding in the moment in a way that is, adequate, where you don't like lose it completely. You don't somehow
Yeah.
agree with a client's assessment, which is what Jesse was pointing out. Right? It's like, yeah, lots of people hate their thighs. Trust me.
Yeah.
Trust me, as you say, patting your own thighs,
Yeah. Yeah.
bunch of fat here to like so knowing how to respond in the moment, and at the same time, how do we have this bigger conversation and fold it into an ongoing client relationship?
Yeah.
How do we set it up from the beginning? And how do we keep having, it's like when kids ask like, mommy, where do kids come from? And you're like, like there is the in the moment, but also like, what is this ongoing conversation? Is
Yes,
like
exactly.
it's not a one and done thing ever.
100%. So someone said in the chat, I've heard a default response of, oh, don't say that, which isn't particularly helpful. When
Yes.
I think about the immediate response in the moment, outside of the context of this ongoing conversation, um, I think validation, 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 because essentially someone is using sort of culturally sanctioned language to tell you that they have a hurt, right? Like they're saying like, I have an ow, something hurts. I looked in the mirror and I have a hurt. So if you're like, oh, don't be hurt, like no one in the history of the world has ever just stopped hurting because of this. But I would say in that moment, instead of validating what happens a lot of times is people trying to be very kind, they'll validate the story and not the hurt. So they'll be like you said, like, oh God, I totally hear you, thighs are gross, I feel the same way. Or even, oh, that's very normal, starts to validate a little bit maybe deeper, but is also still very much in the story. For me, I think validating in a way that's productive and insightful and allows the client to feel truly seen in that moment is to acknowledge that there is a deeper hurt happening. Like even just to say like, "Oh, that must feel awful." Or, "God, I'm so sorry that looking in the mirror feels that way to you." Because that's basically they're like handing you a vulnerable little thing. They don't mean to a lot of times because it's this culturally sanctioned sort of superficial story of I look gross, but they are basically saying like I'm in emotional pain right now. And so to respond to that pain without getting caught up in the details of the story is pretty powerful, honestly. Just to have someone respond to you by saying like, "Oh God, that sounds so painful. I'm so sorry that's your experience right now." It immediately grounds everything more into the truth of the moment instead of spiraling off into the superficial story. And it makes the person feel like they can trust you because you've just made them feel deeply seen, which means they're probably going to be more likely to open up in a way that is actually going to be productive in this conversation, right? Because if you're like, oh God, me too, they're like, yeah, what are you going to do? Or something, it's all going to stay on that level. If you're like, God, that sounds so painful. Is that a common experience for you? They're going to be a lot more likely to be like, actually, yeah, it's like a pretty major deal in my life. I think about it all the time. And now we're getting into something that actually matters, right? So that's when I think instant moment validation, like acknowledge what's really happening. They're telling you that something hurts.
Well, and I think we're also trying to very intentionally step away from this like dysfunctional co-bonding that like is very normalized, especially among
Totally.
men, right? Like it's this like, oh, like I'm fat here, like, oh, I'm fat over here. Like I totally get it. That's disgusting. Oh no, you think that's disgusting. Look at like, right? Like the
Yeah.
whole thing is just like so strangely ingrained into just like society. Like overhear that still very much at like social gatherings perhaps, right? And uh, here I'm hearing you say like two things in the moment when the client reacts in such a negative way. On one hand, validate, and that might, you notice validate doesn't mean agree.
Right.
Validate means I hear you, right? And it's like, so like I think that the words we can use here is like, I'm so sorry you feel that way. That must be so painful, right? Like
Yeah.
that really sucks that to feel that way. There's
Yeah.
the validate, and then perhaps one step further, if it's appropriate, it's the getting curious. Like, what
Yeah.
made you say that? Like, how come?
Yeah.
And doing that very much from the non-judgmental space. Like, how come? Like, what is it about your
Yeah.
thoughts? Like, how, right? And you would have to decide if it's appropriate or not to get into that
Right.
middle of the workout, or maybe you're in the
Yep.
middle of a session, right? Like, but Jesse, would you say that's sort of what you're thinking here? Like, validate,
Definitely.
curious?
I also think that whether or not you actually go down the path of like the curious asking questions or furthering the conversation, what you've done by validating the deeper thing, which by the way, you really have to trust yourself on this because if somebody says my thighs are gross, it is a bit of a leap. It breaks a bit of a cultural norm to be like, whoa, that must feel really awful for you. Because they did not say, I'm experiencing an emotional pain that feels awful, right? So you really have to trust yourself to step into the space, point it into the deeper, truer moment that you believe on some intuitive level you can recognize for what it is. And then they get to respond, right? They can be like, oh, it's not that bad. Like, relax. They can totally be like, no, I don't want to go to that deeper level. But a lot of people really respond in a like they drop into their bodies a little bit more. They relax a little bit when they are met with that deeper level because it ultimately like yeah it says catches people off guard that they've never been responded to exactly it breaks the script and it puts them back in a moment of like really being present for a second and going oh you're right you know what it does suck and like I don't talk to people about this very often but it's kind of a big thing in my life so you're immediately getting I think you're getting the insight the connections happening for them that maybe this is a big deal. Maybe it deserves to be talked about or healed. Maybe there's someone out there who's actually going to meet them in a space where it feels real as opposed to feels like, oh, girl, me too, And so to me, this is like so powerful just to basically respond as if they've said, I am in emotional pain because 99% of the time, that's what it is.
Yeah, and Cecil was asking, like, should we agree with their statement when we validate? Like, I like how you say make them feel
Mm,
seen rather than like, oh, I feel that too. Because first of all, I might not, and second of all, I
right.
might not actually agree with
Yeah.
that assessment. Because when we talk about validation, it's this like acknowledgement that what you're feeling is not weird or strange. It is
Yeah.
normal. It's valid to feel that way. Don't have to agree. I definitely don't
Right.
agree with the fact that your thighs are disgusting.
Right.
Absolutely do not agree. And I think the other thing is like the breaking the script, Jesse, can be so powerful in the moment as well. I do that sometimes in sessions where I will go with, and when if client says, well, like I'm disgusting, and I will say, well, let's play with that for a second. Let's
Totally.
say you are, you're disgusting.
Uh-huh.
What does that mean? And that's also a little bit of like,
Yeah.
because no one has ever probably heard somebody say back, okay, you're disgusting.
Yep.
Uh-huh.
Another
Tell
way to Yeah, yeah. Oh, interesting. Another way to break the script that I used to do before I felt like, sort of they were coming in and ready to talk about it was just to ask what kind of response would feel really good for them. So if somebody's like, "Oh my God, my thighs are so gross," to be like, "Huh, what kind of response can I give you right now that would feel good?" Or feel, like what kind of response are you looking for from me right now? Because that immediately breaks the script, but it also makes them kind of realize, well, if you agree, I'm going to feel like shit. If you disagree, I'm not going to believe you. And it kind of just, it like pulls the curtain back on the fact that you're having like a facade of a conversation a little bit and points it back to them. What would feel good? I don't know. I guess just tell me that that's normal. And you're like, oh, okay, great. Now I kind of have some direction. Like, oh, yeah, a lot of people struggle with this. And if that's a moment that you feel invited to continue, you can certainly continue asking questions or whatever.
Yeah, can you say that again? Can you repeat that? That question was, so when somebody says it, you respond with, huh, what kind of response? And then what did you say?
Like, what kind of response would feel good to you to
Mm, mhm.
that? Or what kind of response are you looking for out of me right now?
Yeah,
And I mean, depending on what they say, obviously, that can go a lot of different directions.
yeah, I like that. Let me just pop into the chat here for a second. Oh, such a beautiful way to help them feel seen. Thank you. Yes. I saw a question. Michelle was saying past clients that were with me for a very long time would tell me how her father would hit her in the stomach and tell her, "You're fat. What are you going to do about this stomach?"
Yeah.
She was in her
So
40s when that was happening, and he was in his 70s.
this is so, so common. So when I said the thing about trauma, like, I'm not kidding. Okay. So what I would say to that is that we have all agreed culturally to a lie that it is acceptable, maybe not ideal. I do feel like people can be like, oh, that's not ideal. But we've all agreed that it's more or less acceptable to comment on people's bodies, sort of pinch and grab people's bodies, tell people what they should do with their bodies, right? Like there is this like normative sense, even if you're like, ugh, that sucked, you're still basically following along with the social agreement that it wasn't a completely insane and inappropriate thing to happen to you. So, in those moments, the first thing I would do is validate that that should not have happened. Like, like really, that is not okay. And that can look a lot of different ways. I mean, it doesn't have to be super serious depending on how somebody's telling you the story. But I just think, again, pointing back to that like deeper I have a pain is saying something like, I am so sorry that happened to you. This is a shocking thing for a lot of people to hear. They're like, oh, really? Yeah, I guess. Huh. Yeah. Me too, actually. Like it sometimes is the first time someone's ever been like, that should not have happened. And a lot of our stuff around body image is linked to some kind of trauma that should not have happened. And so just glossing over it and being like, again, staying in that story of like, well, what does this mean about your belly? And, there's just stuff in that that's very easy to get drawn into when actually what's happening is someone said, I have a trauma. And in that moment, you get to say, thank you for trusting me with this story. I am so sorry that happened to you. That should not have happened. Um, and again, like depending on the relationship and the response and all these things, there's a lot of directions you could go to continue helping the person explore. Like, have you worked through that with a therapist? Or, I mean, what kind of support system do you have for healing from that? But ultimately, in that moment, I think people expect it to be like an eye roll, like, ugh, yeah, grandpas or whatever, right? Like that goes into the narrative that even though it wasn't ideal, it still sort of makes sense. Maybe was still sort of your fault.
Well, and that often invites that comparative suffering, right? Like, I mean,
Hmm.
hopefully less so if you're working with a
Sure.
professional, but definitely like in social settings, like, well, my dad used to do this. I was like, well, my dad used to do that. And we're just like, cool. We just shrugged and kind of went on. And I
Yeah.
think also, Jesse, like this situation that someone described, first of all, I really want to like write down and put the phrase in the pocket. I like hate the tips and tricks, but like sometimes when we have like the exact wording, like
Totally.
that simply I'm so sorry that happened to you. It's
Yeah.
such a simple sentence that if you can just have it like nearby, and you're like, heck, you could have it taped to your computer, because sometimes when we receive, when we're the recipients of something like really deep and dark, right? And when it gets to deep and dark, somebody being slapped on their belly could be like the least of their problems, so to speak, right? They could
Sure.
get real deep and dark. So just to have that, like the words to
Yep.
say, like, I'm so sorry that that happened to you.
Yeah. And something that I feel it doesn't feel especially professional. It's just something that I think I've ended up doing a lot and gotten really great feedback. It's especially for people who aren't super like aware of trauma, or maybe they've never been in therapy or whatever. I will say, if nobody has ever said this to you before, let me be the first one to say that wasn't your fault and it shouldn't have happened. And
Yeah.
again, these are people who a lot of times will kind of brush it off like, oh, yeah, no, I know, it's fine. But like those moments when I'm working with someone long term, they come back and they go, by the way, like no one had ever said that to me before. And I thought about that for weeks. And I'm like, yeah, because that matters. Like for someone to go, uh, thank you for sharing that story. It wasn't your fault. And like, it just shifts the entire narrative in their own heads. Also, by the way, so Meredith, my mom told me that I was a freshman in high school, that I'll always be a chubby girl. I'm 43 and still managing the effects of that comment. I love the the response here. I'm sorry that happened to you. So obviously, like we could do a whole call on something like that. But my immediate thought when I hear something like that is like, what did that mean to you at the time? Because again, it's so much of body image stuff is the meaning that was assigned that we assume is like default. Like maybe the meaning that you assigned to the word chubby, the meaning your mom might have even been assigning was like unworthy of something specific, something vague in general. But like that immediately becomes the next question in my mind is, okay, and what did you learn from a moment like that about yourself, or what did you take in, or like getting to starting to point toward the meaning that's been assigned in these moments of trauma. For example, like what did that person learn by having someone grab their stomach? Probably a bunch of stuff. Like it's okay, my body exists for other people and they have a right to pinch and grab it if it doesn't meet their standards. Like I don't deserve bodily autonomy or dignity or respect. Like, those are some things that probably wouldn't be what they would immediately report, but those are also going to be the bigger, deeper things that make you hate your stomach when actually what you hated was having your stomach grabbed by somebody who felt they had a right to grab it, right? Like, that's the next step for me is pointing them back to the meaning.
Yeah. So one of the wordings I use sometimes, it's like when, say, like my husband said this or my friend said this, and there is sometimes that kind of disconnect. So I ask, they said that. What did you hear? Like, so what did you,
Yes.
right? Like, what did you hear?
Great question.
What did that mean to you?
Uh-huh.
Sometimes, what did we make it mean? Right? Like as
Yeah.
well. So I wanted to get back to the question
Yeah.
that was asked a little bit earlier. Goodness, it's going to be a big one. Uh, how do we help someone who lives in a household where they're frequently shamed for their body and they can't leave their household or get a divorce?
Mm.
In one sentence or less. Give us a
um
quick tip.
Oof. I'm going to say there are two answers to this. The first is to let them know that you see that they are trapped in an unsafe situation of some kind, because clearly they must be, and that you hope that they are getting support, which I guess would just be like sort of bearing witness a little bit and letting them know that someone cares. The other thing is a little bit more tricky, or rather just complex and long term, because that basically would be helping them start to understand that there is a difference between what other people say and how other people treat them, and their own self-worth, self-narrative, self-concept, all of those things. So like starting to divest from other people's opinions, other people's treatment of you can be as simple as getting angry at the person who's mistreating you instead of getting angry at yourself for deserving the mistreatment. It can also be as complex and like bigger picture project of divesting from greater social and cultural narratives about what makes you worthy as a person, or like what role you play in order to have value in society. But yeah, I would say helping someone tap into anger is often like a really valuable thing, because when you are sending all of that negative energy that naturally comes up when you're trapped in a position that is unjust, you're going to have negative energy come up. If you've learned that you're trapped and therefore can't send it outward because other people aren't going to like that, then you send it inward and you blame yourself and your body. This is an internal shift. Nothing external has to change for a person to feel a little bit better when they start blaming the person, system, circumstances that actually deserve their blame instead of blaming themselves. That's a massive, empowering, life altering skill to build. Uh, it also will not change the situation, which is why I'm like, I don't
Yeah.
know what your role is there, but that is a situation that seems like it needs addressing. But your internal experience of it without escaping the actual scenario can be absolutely changed through basically like where you are assigning that negative energy to go, that anger, that blame, that rage, whatever it might be.
Yeah, and I think it really brings up the topic, right? Like of we hear a lot of times, and this is so incredibly frustrating for a helping professional when you have a client in front of you who's so motivated to get better in like whatever better means for them. Like maybe like it's trauma healing, body image, right? Like health, overall wellness, whatever it might be. And yet they are in an environment, the household of origin or their nuclear
Yeah.
family, where that is incredibly like just unsupportive, some best case scenario unsupportive, and in some cases just downright toxic or
Yeah.
abusive, right? And you know, you are then in this role, like first of all, what is my role?
Yeah.
I'm a health coach, I'm a health coach, I'm a health coach, right? Like I'm not, like this is, I'm not a couples therapist. I'm not,
Right, right,
right? Like I'm not a police officer. Like, so sort of like, what is my role
right.
here? Where does my scope of practice end? Right? Like I always think like my interests are always my clients' interests, not their spouses, children's,
Right,
anyone
right.
else. Like that, I always have their interests in mind. And at the same time, the like the superficial line of like just leave, well just get out of there, you just tell them, girl, like also it implies such incredible privilege that like a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people in those situations do not have, whether it's
Exactly.
financially or culturally or religiously, right? Like
Yeah.
so maybe I'm in a marriage and my religion does not allow
Yeah.
divorce or separation
Or
as
economically.
economically, yeah.
Yeah. So someone asked, would you say that anger is part of the stages of grief so that they'll eventually be able to let go or make the trauma feel not as severe? Yes. Yes, it absolutely is a vital stage of healing. If they were to go to therapy and deal with this, anger would be undoubtedly a part of that healing experience. But I also think that even away from such a framework, what anger does is it brings energy. Like literally, anger is a biological response to injustice, and it comes with a burst of energy so that you can set that injustice or boundary violation right. So it comes with it puts you in action. Whereas like depression, for example, comes with no energy and it tells you just, you know what, go back to bed. So if you're blaming yourself and you're in that very depressed energy, getting angry is sometimes the first step toward like getting out of bed, essentially, like moving in the direction of, whoa, that shouldn't have happened to me. That's not fair. That wasn't my fault. And fuck that guy, or like it starts to, even again, nothing happening in the actual external world. You are now going to experience yourself completely differently. That burst of energy to set things right, even if you're not using it to actually move, to like confront somebody or whatever, it does start to set things right inside you. So it brings energy. It releases you of the shame and blame that you've been holding against yourself for having deserved it somehow. And that just immediately starts to set your relationship with yourself into a better place.
Yeah. Michelle was wondering, how hard is it for people to be willing to go deeper? What if they shut down and don't want to talk about this anymore?
Okay, so because of the training relationship, I always think of it as offer them one level down. And I actually do this everywhere in my life. Like if I'm meeting a random stranger at a bar and they're like, "Oh my God, I'm so gross," I will do the same thing there with them. But like always offer one level down or plant a seed and basically just let them know that there is room if they want to take it. And then if they don't, that's it. You did your job. Your job is to make sure that they know there is room. So as long as you're willing to sometimes be in an awkward position of having gone a level down and having the person be like, no, thank you. Like there is very much an awkward moment of like, wow, I'm so sorry that happened. And then the person is like, oh my God, don't be dramatic. Like it was fine. And they've basically said to you, I will not be going deeper with you on this thing right now. You did plant a seed. Maybe they think of you when eventually there's something to share and they're like, that person did make me feel seen. I feel like they might be safe to talk to. Planting that seed and building that relationship, I think does have long-term payoff, even if they say no in the moment. It's never your job to push. It's just your job to offer a little invitation. Hmm.
Yeah, it's never your job to push. So that little invitation. So we are about halfway through our time together. So if you actually had any specific questions, client or self, lots of self work here, pop them in the chat. And Jesse, to your last point about like the level down, right? Like I kind of think of sometimes when we uncover trauma in our client work, it's almost like you realize the client is carrying a very large couch, like a piece of furniture, like just walking around with this goddamn couch on their back, right? And when you go kind of like very carefully about pointing out that there is a couch, right? They're complaining about how hard it is to walk. Some of them will say, "Oh my God, I had no idea I was carrying this thing."
Totally.
And maybe they will drop it, or maybe they will put it down for a second, or maybe they will work with you to try and learn how to put it down and walk without it. But some clients will literally say, "Couch? What couch? I don't have a couch. I have no idea what you're talking about." You're like, "Got it."
Yeah, 100%. And honoring their autonomy means saying, oh, my bad. Yep. Like I thought I perceived what I perceived, and you have set me right, and that will be the last I say of it for now. Like that's a part of it. By the way, so someone said, I find that many people are uncomfortable seeing someone move through anger and they attempt to squash it instead of be curious about why it's presenting. Hell yes. And this is super gendered, super, super gendered. So men basically get one emotion and it's anger. And they're generally pretty comfortable being in it, although not all men, whatever. But like there is a conditioning around it that men understand that it's acceptable or appropriate for them to get angry, to move through anger. Women are the opposite. They get a whole bunch of other emotions. They can be sad, for example, totally fine. But they can't be angry because anger means that they are basically not doing their existential job under patriarchy, which is to make other people comfortable, because anger immediately steps you into a space of asking for something or holding someone accountable or, basically entering some kind of conflict that might be a burden on the other person because there has been an injustice and you are connecting to that. So this is such a gendered thing. Yeah, anger for women gets read as out of control, hysterical, or aggressive. You know what it also does? It costs women relationships because there is, for a lot of women, an assumption that they will be the caretakers, they will be the nurturers. There is nothing less caretakery and nurturery than holding somebody else accountable for their actions. So what they learn is I will lose all my value to this person if I express anger with them. So when someone pokes or prods their body or, says something abusive, they don't think to themselves, "Oh, I'll blame myself instead. That'll be way better." They just know they don't have an option to be like, "What the hell, dad?" Like that's not acceptable because they know the logic follows that will make dad upset. That will make dad think less of you. That might make you end up like neglected, abandoned, rejected. Any number of horrible, terrifying, abandoning things could happen on the other side. So you take it, you swallow it, and now you hate your body. So like there is a lot to be said for helping people get in touch with their anger and validating themselves and their own experiences. And down the line, if you are moving towards a more external sort of like action-based thing, holding other people accountable for those moments, speaking up when someone violates your boundaries or touches your body or comments on what you're eating or whatever. This is a huge skill I teach my clients. And we will role play and we will practice and we will build in baby steps because it's terrifying. But when someone says, oh my God, you're going back for seconds, like, your husband's going to leave you if you gain any more weight. Like, these are inappropriate things that shouldn't be happening, and teaching people to break from, you're right, that's my deal to swallow now. Like, I can't possibly hold you accountable for how incredibly rude that is. To help them learn the skill of just saying, I always call it like the truthiest truth. It's like, there's the truth, which is like, in that moment, like, oh no, I just it's not a big deal. I didn't eat much for lunch, right? Like that can be true. The truthiest truth is like, whoa, that was rude. Or like, that's not appropriate, or you're making me uncomfortable. Like, that's the thing that actually needs to be said in those moments. It's not usually that complex to speak up and hold people accountable. But that is the skill that follows when you actually have tapped into anger enough to validate your own experience and the fact that you deserve respect, dignity, and autonomy. My rant about that. This is a huge part of my work with people.
So Lisa
Yeah.
was just sharing, she had a client who struggled with body image her entire life and came thinking our relationship was going to be 100% about weight loss. And instead, we took a turn quickly and delved into self worth and self esteem. And she's run with that and now 100% focused on figuring out how to get out of the mindset of needing to look a certain way. And I think that's an interesting one, Jesse, because I think that I would guess that probably happens less for you now because people do come explicitly for body image work. But I would argue for a lot of you on the call, this is probably a very real scenario where some folks come to you for some sort of body transformation or body changes. They want to make their body usually just more in line with whatever culturally that is, meaning women want to get smaller and men want to get bigger in some fashion, right?
Yeah.
And very often that morphs into discussions of deep health and often trauma and often baggage of all kinds.
Yeah. So Um, it does happen. I mean, it happens less because most of the people who walk through my like figurative door, they know that we're talking about something deeper because of the content I put out. But even so, I'd say I spend like the first month with a new client talking about body image and the rest of our time together talking about pretty much anything else. And at some point we swing back around and go, oh, look, things are solved. Like it's so deeply true that body image is not about your body. And as soon as you start getting into that deeper stuff, like that becomes the focus for quite some time. And then they might swing back and report, 5 months later, like, wow, this thing happened. And I know I would have had a complete spiral or a meltdown or not been able to do this thing. And it's pretty cool that that didn't happen this time. And the thing I teach is body neutrality. So someone asked about confidence. Body neutrality is sort of an alternative to body positivity, which implies that you should be able to love your body in this sort of like warm gush of affection and gratitude all the time, which is just not how we love people, but whatever. So neutrality offers you, I think, a really nice low stakes, low pressure place to land as far as basically being able to see your body for what it is. You might not prefer to look the way you do, but you also recognize that not preferring something is not a crisis. It's the crisis comes in when it's about what you've assigned your body to mean. So it's like, okay, well, I don't prefer to be in a chubby body. I look in the mirror, I think this is not what I like. That's all actually pretty neutral. What's not neutral is to go, and because I'm chubby, it's because I'm a disgusting piece of shit who's too lazy. And that thing my mom said when I was a kid is going to come true. And this is why nobody loves me. And this is why I'm not successful. And this is why I'll never be happy. Now it's a freaking crisis, right? Like now the same image in the mirror has become an absolute source. Like this is where people have panic attacks and meltdowns and like ruin their vacations because they just feel so, so awful. It's not about that. It's about the meaning that that has brought up for them. So for me, what the way I define it is neutrality is the ability to look in the mirror, acknowledge that both of what you see is true and also what you feel about it is true, and not assign the meaning that takes you down that crisis rabbit hole, or frankly, a positive one either, because the positive one is like, I'm so fit. That means I'm good. Now I'm worthy of love. Today I get to feel good about myself. That's a rabbit hole too, right? That's meaning that is not appropriate being assigned to your appearance. So neutrality is just stripping that stuff away and being able to be like, this is how I look. It's not my favorite. Move on with my day.
Yeah, and I think of it as I think somebody was using the metaphor of like kind of living in a house, like where you consider your home, right? Like it's probably not the perfect, most amazing,
Yeah.
ideal, optimal dwelling. And yet you probably find it in your heart to love it because it is your home and that's where you live. And
Yeah.
sometimes we can, no, there's that thing that maybe could use some fixing, and that thing is not my favorite, but
Yeah.
it's not a crisis like,
Yeah.
because that's where I just happen to live. Like
Yeah.
that's just where this is the container that I happen to live in.
I say all the time, like, if you're not having panic attacks that, like, your car is dirty, or you hate your wallpaper and you haven't gotten around, like, then it's not actually, like, we're talking about the meaning associated with your body that needs to be looked at. It there's lots of shit in the world that we don't prefer and we don't have meltdowns about, right? Like, because we haven't assigned them some kind of meaning associated with our worthiness, our ability to get our needs met, like our fundamental safety moving through the world. All of these things that bodies are linked to, that we have to go in and explore. That's why it's such a big project, because there's so many reasons, so many underlying things that can be at play when we're talking about somebody who struggles with body image. And that's why it's not something you can do in the moment. Like, tell me all of the things that you've assigned to your body and what it means. It's just too big. But what you can do is start to help them in the moment recognize maybe something deeper is going on, and maybe someone will care about it.
Yeah, so Dr. Krista Scott Dixon, which I think the name most of you on the call will probably know, used to say in a call when a client would be going down the specifically negative rabbit hole about their body, like, and then I looked in the
Yeah.
mirror this morning and I just saw rolls and it was just like awful. She would say,
Yeah.
what else is going on for you this week?
Yes.
Like, so what's going on for you
Yes.
this week? And
If
more, more often than not, it was something else going on that week.
So this is something that I notice in my clients, the arc that I tend to take clients through. For a while, because they've come to me, they're obviously struggling pretty majorly with body image. For a while, you can't tell the difference between other factors having an impact on it, because body image is constant. As we start to pick that apart and that starts to get better, a new thing happens where now we're identifying triggers, because it's much more clear at a certain point that, like, the same triggers that make you feel like abandoned in your relationship are also happening around the same time that your body image gets really bad, right? Like, now we get to find new patterns and look at that question starts to become really relevant. But if somebody is so deeply mired in it that, like, what else is going on this week doesn't freaking matter because it's so connected to so many things that body image is just basically always up, then that question doesn't really make that much sense, or it won't really take you anywhere productive. So depending.
I lost Jesse's.
Oh, yeah. Is it back?
You're back. You're back.
Okay.
And it's gone again. It's like kind of going in and out.
Is it better?
It's better.
Okay.
Thank you.
So if you're working with someone who or you have a sense is constantly in a body image trigger place, a question like that won't necessarily be as helpful. Whereas if you know somebody is like mostly okay, but then is like, I've been having a terrible body image week, that's the perfect time, right? Like, oh, interesting. What happened right before that started?
Right.
And if somebody's in the constant place, I think, a little bit more important in those moments to go in and be like, that sounds so hard. Really doing that validation work, because they basically are living in chronic pain and no one has ever told them, hey, that's worth healing. That's a real thing and it's worth looking at. And there are ways to look at it that can keep that from happening. So, like, I think those are two different things. But a lot of people, I feel like when I was training, a lot of people would come in and be like, I have my period, so I'm having like a terrible body image week. And, those are the moments where you're like, ooh, interesting. Like we can start to notice what sets it off and what makes it better. Like you went on that one random vacation and you didn't care. What was so special about that? And they're like, oh my God, I just was with these friends who make me feel so safe and seen. I'm like, uh-huh. So maybe then like a trigger is feeling isolated or unseen, right?
Well, and I really want to highlight, like, it's interesting because I think oftentimes, like, here the goal really seems to be to decrease the charge around
Yeah.
like the body, right? Like, which I think can feel counterintuitive sometimes,
Yeah.
because I think sometimes we think that like what we're supposed to do or supposed to help others do is fix it.
Yeah.
It's like fix the thing and discover enlightenment and holistic wellness and positive body image on the other side. Where,
Mm-hmm.
Jesse, what I really love about like your approach is that like neutrality, it's the neutral piece where we really just put the dial down, and it's no longer a drama as much,
Yeah.
right? Or like the volume just goes down. And I really think
Yeah.
of like somebody like I've had an eating disorder, helped a lot of people with like kind of disordered eating and eating disorders themselves, where I still just catch these moments of how magical it is for me to just not care about food that much. Like it's just like, yeah, it's whatever, like you eat, you move on. Like the fact that it's uninteresting, and that in itself is so incredible. And I think that right, like it's this like, how do we make it just mean and matter
Yeah.
less, because it's really hard to go on through your day and like cure cancer and like build
Yeah.
houses and do big important things if you're constantly focused on how there's this roll of the skin that is touching the pant leg whatever.
So that is my whole freaking mission is this was something funny about my book. So it's body neutral. And then we had to come up with the whatever you call the like, subtitle or whatever of my book. And I was going back and forth with my team and I kept loving subtitles that were kind of like body neutral, how to feel kind of meh about your body. And they're like, Jesse, that will not sell books. That will not sell books. And I'm like, but that's what I feel like. It's kind of like, how do you just fucking move on? I don't know. Like the meh is the magic. But we have learned, and I think so many people, this is part of the issue with body positivity, is it sort of accidentally points you back to your confidence coming from your body, which is just more meaning being placed on your body. So, like, you're supposed to feel confident if you look hot and follow all the rules and you're fit and you're thin and you're conventionally attractive and whatever. You're supposed to feel confident. That's where you're it's like we would see a woman like that who said, oh, I'm really insecure. Everyone would go, but why? Look at you, right? Like we have a concept that that's where it comes from, especially for women. My view is that how you look should have no bearing whatsoever on your confidence, ever, because it's so boring. There's so much cooler shit about who you are and what you can do in this world. And how you look or your pant size or whatever it is just like the most boring way of complimenting a person. It's the most boring way of feeling confident about yourself. Like it's boring. And I think on some level, we all know that, which is why we're like, oh, beauty ideals, I hate this. But like the cultural narrative is it makes sense. Of course, you should feel beautiful. You should want to feel beautiful. It's important to feel beautiful. It feels good when other people think you're beautiful. But actually, I don't know. I feel a little insulted if someone calls me beautiful. I'm like, really? That's what you're getting out of me? Like
That's all you got, that's
yeah,
all you got.
like that's fine. I mean, like there's a lot going on here. So if hot is what you're coming up with, like I'm a bit disappointed. Because that's not interesting to me and that's not valuable to me. And helping other people in the ways that we've been talking about stop finding it so interesting and valuable is the whole point of the work of body neutrality. It takes you down a path of, I am a really cool person worthy of good things, no matter what my body looks like, which means that no matter what my body looks like, I get to feel good about who I am. So building self-worth in this totally other way outside of hierarchies and beauty ideals and body things like weight stigma, fat phobia, whatever, it just shifts the whole game. And I always ask people like, can you name someone who is in a fat body or is conventionally unattractive who is confident? Everyone can, right? And I go, then that proves it. that proves it's not the magic sauce that we've been promised it would be, nor is it that you are going to be kept from confidence until you look a certain way. We can look at that proof and go, I could like myself no matter what.
So Leah was wondering, I work with teen girls. Social
Mm,
media has changed body image so much more than when I was a teen.
yeah.
What's a way to help support them with this?
Mm. Girls right now are really interesting. It's a weird moment because it's like so much worse in certain ways visually around beauty ideals because of social media, and so much better than when I was growing up in terms of like, I
Yeah.
don't know, like nobody's in the closet anymore and everybody is just like, yeah, gender is sort of a construct, so who cares? Like there's so much activism and social awareness happening in this generation. Um, at the same time that they're being put into smaller and smaller boxes. Like it's a weird situation. My feeling is that support for any teenager just looks like making them feel heard and valid, because that is like the most crucial thing in their brain development in that particular moment. And what most teenagers are like sorely lacking. Um, so just listening and asking questions and thanking them for sharing and letting them know that you think that their opinion matters and their feelings are valid. Like it's pretty basic, but I do feel like that's some of the biggest stuff you can do. If you are in a position to have deeper conversations, I would recommend talking about systems of oppression and inviting them to be pissed about them so that they can call upon that social aware rebel that lives in them, because that is the generational stew, unlike the one we grew up in. um, that I think it'll be easier for them to call upon rejecting certain ideals once they are fully given permission to see that those ideals are stupid and fake.
Hmm.
That's my sense. And when I work with people who have teen kids, there is a really good response to that kind of thing. Like the minute you're like, oh, well, let's talk about patriarchy and beauty ideals and social media, they're all like, got it. Like that makes total intuitive sense to me. Whereas if you're trying to make them feel better about how they actually look, I don't know how far that can go, because what they're saying is, I want to feel seen and respected and valued by my peers because my brain development in this moment is telling me that that's the most important thing for my survival. Like, you're not going to get around that. It's just going to be a thing.
Well,
But you
and also
can
like,
call upon, yeah, go ahead.
I mean, Jesse, the fact that you're kind of pointing out here, right? Like, I think sometimes, like, and you know this about me because I'm obviously a former client, right? Like, but I think everyone on the call knows this about me as I'm a contrarian, so
Yeah.
I question assumptions, right? So I think whenever we go in as health and wellness professionals and we
Mhm.
say, geez, I mean, with all the social media, things are so much worse than when we were growing up. I actually am tempted to say, is that true? And how do we know it's true? And are there
Mhm.
any ways in which things are better? Because
Yeah,
a lot of folks, especially marginalized folks, I actually think would argue that a lot of things are better, to some of the Jessica
totally.
earlier, and how much easier it is to find like your people, right? Like then, like imagine living in a small town and being
Yeah.
trans or queer, or living in a large body, like whatever it may be. Like there's a community for any, like you want to get into competitive knitting, congratulations. Like I'm convinced that is a thing
Yep.
online, and there are clubs and competitions, and you can find it, right? Like
Yep.
whether or not they have them where you are. Someone was wondering, is it beneficial to validate and acknowledge the trauma as trauma comes up, but then invite to shift the focus to positive things? So guide the client, what do you like about your body? I have
Ooh.
feelings. I have feelings about that.
So there are moments that could be appropriate.
Hmm.
I wouldn't,
How come?
because I feel like it immediately invalidates the experience that's happening and it pushes you into a direction of like more self-judgment for struggling. So even though, like, again, it's like if you have you have 30 seconds to have a conversation. Like, if you're a group X instructor and you're able to say one thing that nobody's going to respond to, like, there are moments that could be useful, right? But in general, if another human is trying to tell you, I have a pain, and you're like, yeah, that makes sense. Can we try to fix it? I guess maybe what I would say is ask first. Ask if they want to go into solving mode. Ask if they want to try a practice of gratitude or positivity. Ask if, and even that I'm a little bit like, because most people are going to just try to be nice and be like, yeah, sure, even if it feels invalidating. So my feeling would be that holding all of the space is enough of a job. You don't have to fix.
Yeah, and I
And
think
honestly, like so many people need more space help for them than anyone realizes.
the space, right? Like what you're referring to here, because I think that the pressure to positively reframe comes from like our belief that that is our role as
Yeah, or
coaches.
our own discomfort. Like if a client is like weeping with you, you're like, I want this to stop. Like I'm so uncomfortable knowing how uncomfortable they are. How do I fix it? But actually, like the best thing for people who are weeping is just to be given a space to weep and maybe be held or validated, or depending on the relationship of what's happening, like just let it be so that there isn't pressure on them to get through it quickly and get better. So you stop making the other person uncomfortable or make the other person feel like they have value and worth by solving your problem. Like it's such a kind impulse and it tends to just make us cut ourselves off.
Yeah, and the question that I ask coaches sometimes, like when we ask, like, well, should we kind of positively help them positively reframe it? I say, for who? Is it for your benefit
Yeah.
or is it for their benefit? Because if
Mm-hmm.
you are clear in the fact that it is indeed for their benefit, great.
Mm-hmm.
But very often it is, like you're pointing out, it's actually for our benefit because it's like just
Yeah.
very uncomfortable to be in the suck.
Yeah. I love this. Do you want to be helped, heard, or hugged right now? That's great. Also, I just wanted to give you, as we're finishing up, like another question. If you feel comfortable invoking curiosity, I would say, this is so much more useful when someone is saying something they intend as a compliment than it is when it's like a negative, like body trash talking. But it's also really valuable to create that space and build that relationship with someone. If someone says, like, I feel awesome, I fit into my jeans from pre-pregnancy or something, or you look amazing, like, have you been doing more cardio? You get to, this is my, I love this. This won't be everybody's jam. I love to act like I've never heard the association between thinness and goodness before. And I make them explain it to me. Like, huh, wait, why is that a good thing? Or like, what about that makes you happy? Or, yeah, just whatever it is, just to like point it back toward that curiosity inside them because you've broken the script. And immediately they have to be like, basically telling you what the meaning is. You've brought it to a deeper level immediately. Like, is that a compliment? Could you
Playing
tell me why?
playing dumb in the moment is incredible, right? Because very often, like you said, it makes people explain, and you can't explain because it's silly and unfounded.
Yeah.
So immediately it becomes obvious. And I used to do like I do this very often, as you can probably imagine, Jesse. But the specific example I'm thinking of, somebody came up to me at the gym when I was pretty heavily pregnant, and I was wearing shorts and a little like crop top, and she said, "Wow, you're really brave." And I said, "How come?"
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, right? Like, just
Explain it to me.
confused face,
Go
right?
on.
That's right. Or
Or
it's
even like, ugh, I need to be good, or I shouldn't have this dessert, or I need to lose weight. Any of those things. You can also be like, oh, why? Like, you're like, yeah, I'm so curious. What's the answer? I've never heard of this association that obviously everybody would want to lose weight. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. So Jesse, I am actually going to send 2 copies of your book to 2 of the folks on this call, but I am going to put
Woohoo!
that pressure on you. So I would love for you to maybe give us a couple of questions, comments, or shares today that stood out. And
Ooh,
those are going to be the
that's
first
fun.
step.
I do have to jump off, but gosh, there were so many and I didn't get to read them all. So sorry everybody. There was so much in there that I would have liked to respond.
Just
Um
organic, whatever comes up.
okay, who is the person who it was something about the anger? They said like keep talking when I apologized for going on a rant. I really enjoyed that one. Like keep talking, you're speaking my language or something.
Okay, we have Michelle.
Oh, okay.
Got it.
And And oh gosh, I don't know. So many good questions. Pressure. I got nothing. Hey, you gotta help
All
me out
right.
here.
That's fine. All right, you got to run. Thank you so much for taking the time. I will stay on for a couple of minutes, so don't everybody leave all at once. But Jesse, thank you so much for doing this, for taking the time. Please Google Jesse Nealand. Jesse is very easy to find online.
Very easy.
I shared their link to their website and Instagram. So get the book if you're not one
Thank
of.
you, everyone. And please reach out to me like Instagram, email, website, literally anywhere, anyhow, if you didn't get a question answered, because I love this stuff. If you have questions, comments, thoughts, whatever, I'm happy to connect.
Amazing. All right. Well, thank you. And just looking through the comments, Lisa Schreiber will be getting another copy of
I
the.
actually saw her name and almost said it, but then I was like
I
feeling
read.
the time pressure.
I read your mind. I got
Love
you.
it.
All right.
Yay!
So this is our last Coaches Connect for this year. So I hope I will see you all in January. Those calls, if they're not posted yet, they will be. And Michelle and Lisa, come find me so I can have your accurate mailing address. So thank you, Jesse. Again, thanks everybody. And I will see you soon.